Good morning and welcome to the KDPG Sunday edition. I'm Ken Rice. It's been almost 3 months since Hurricane Maria devastated Puerto Rico, but we're still totaling the losses in property and in lives. Just this past week, two social scientists, including a Puerto Rican demographer at Penn State, said they believe the actual death count is more than 1,000 people. Hundreds of thousands of people are still without power. FEMA has offered to fly many victims to the U.S. mainland. And CBS News correspondent David Begnaud reports that while the exodus has been taking place, people are still faced with financial uncertainty over how to exist after leaving the island.
6 weeks after Hurricane Maria hit, 2,200 people are still living in shelters.
It's very sad seeing the way I am so helpless.
74-year-old Elsie Ortiz has been sleeping on a cot in a gymnasium for 41 days.
It's hard, but we make the best of it. Everybody, more or less, everybody gives themselves a hand, you know.
The destruction is so vast, FEMA cannot find enough temporary housing or hotels on the island. So the only option is to organize an airlift and fly people to the mainland.
We have never done an air bridge before.
Mike Byrne is FEMA's top officer here. Surprisingly, he says they aren't getting a lot of takers for the airlift.
We're actually, going out and doing, interviews in the shelters where people still are to see if they have an interest. And so far, we're seeing a very low level of interest to take advantage of that program.
Well, I don't think they're really listening.
But Florida Congressman Darren Soto says his office has been overwhelmed with calls from people looking for help. Some 140,000 Puerto Ricans have already fled on their own to Florida.
Obviously, there's an interest to not have a mass exodus from the island because of the economy down there, and we're sensitive to that. But these are American citizens. They should be able to travel freely.
I want to be in Puerto Rico. I want to go to the States.
Glenda Bonilla Colon was planning to quit her job today and sign up for that airlift.
I deserve something better for me. Much better than what I'm having right now.
The offer from FEMA is a round-trip ticket to either Florida or New York, and up to 45 days in a hotel. Now, FEMA will not pay for food or transportation once that evacuee gets to a hotel. And that's actually one reason why a lot of people here are reluctant to go. David Begnaud, CBS News, San Juan, Puerto Rico.
Well, this morning on the KDPG Sunday edition, the remarkable story of how one person can make a difference. Rosana Guernica, a junior at CMU, is a native of San Juan, Puerto Rico, and she has been organizing a mercy mission that has accomplished more than some government agencies. She's made several trips to Puerto Rico, delivering thousands of pounds of medical and relief supplies, critically needed materials, and she's helped bring hundreds of patients to Florida for medical treatment, including a heart-lung transplant. Rosana joins us this morning along with Robert Mangino from KDKA Radio. He traveled with Rosana on one of her flights. David Schrimman, executive editor of the Post-Gazette, joins us for our discussion. Welcome to both of you. Thank you for being here. So how did this all get started? Take us back to the night that the hurricane was hitting, and you're sitting here in Pittsburgh, you have family, you have friends back in Puerto Rico. What was going through your mind?
So anyone who's Puerto Rican was glued to their television screen that night and their laptops watching Hurricane Maria hit. And suddenly we lost contact with all our friends and family on the island. And we started reaching out to one another in the mainland and asking, have you heard from your father? Have you heard from your mother, your friends, anyone? And no one could reach anyone.
No texting, no email, no communication at all.
Nothing. Next day, we start to get some footage in from friends. Messages are able to go through. People are telling us, we're okay, there's a lot of damage. It was worse than what we ever thought it was going to be. I'm seeing my friends' apartments, windows completely gone. I'm seeing the beach uprooted 5 blocks up the street. And so that was scary, but at least most of the people we knew were okay. Of course, there would be some casualties related to the hurricane itself, but that's unfortunately to be expected.
Okay, so you're hearing that, oh, the government help is on the way, right? FEMA will have a response. There's going to be a financial package. The help is it's going to be taken care of, right? That's what most people assume. These are United States citizens, after all.
Of course, and we've had natural disasters before. Any help you need will be there. A couple days later, it started to be a little more obvious that the real risk was not property damage. It wasn't what was happening during the hurricane. It's what was going to start happening after. Because people were starting to say, I still don't have power and I can't keep my medication cold. Or I'm running out of water and I can't seem to be able to buy any anywhere. FEMA has bought, water from my neighborhood, from all the convenience stores around me. And it kept on that way for a week. And no one understood why. It's a place where we have commercial flights, hundreds of commercial flights going in and out every day, where you have Amazon 2-day shipping going. No one understood how we were able to identify needs and speak to people who needed things and not be able to get it to them.
When did it dawn on you, I might have to do something? Me, sitting here in Pittsburgh, my help might be needed.
My friend sent footage of the Port of San Juan and of all the shipping containers full of supplies just being held there. And miles away, people were dying from dehydration, amongst other issues. My friend's aunt died from dehydration. And miles away is everything that they need. And the government's excuse changed every day. One day it was, we don't have enough truck drivers. And then you had dozens of truck drivers show up and say, here's my certification, I can help, put me to work. And no one would speak to them. And they would say, we don't have enough trucks. And so the next day, people would show up with trucks and say, hey, we're here to help, we can do it. And they'd say, oh no, we don't have enough diesel. So that's when I stopped buying any excuses that they were saying. And I said, we have to do something. I had heard, some people had told me, this family is arriving in Miami today. And I said, how? Like, the airport isn't working, there's no way they're able to leave. And they said that they rented a private charter. And that's where I got the idea. I knew all these wealthy families were leaving through private charters. Let's fundraise the money and be able to evacuate the people whose lives depend on it. Not just the people who don't have power, but the people who, if they don't continue their dialysis or get their insulin or could continue their chemo or radiation, are going to perish.
Go ahead, David.
Why do you suppose the government behaved the way it did?
I don't know. I don't know if we ever will. I can't worry about that. All I can do is help the people I can reach.
Do you think the government's excuses were excuses, or were they illegitimate, or were they incompetent, or other kinds of nefarious things?
Whatever it was, it's inexcusable, because you have a responsibility to keep your people safe.
Now, Robert, you were there, right?
Mm-hmm, I was.
How many times?
I just went one time on the fourth trip, the last trip over.
So you're a professional newsman. Had Al-Qaeda done that to Puerto Rico, or ISIS, how do you suppose the response of the United States government would be different?
Oh, there would have been absolute outrage at the idea that anyone would cause that kind of damage, that kind of chaos, turmoil, distress, death, destruction. There would have been an overwhelming response. There are some things that go into play here. I mean, the storm was so great that it encompassed the entire island. When we went in, there were still portions of the airport that were damaged that we went to. The ports had a difficult time being able to get the supplies in. The roads are impassable, at least they were, many of them still to this point. But what's great, though, is that the government does what it can, but it's wonderful people like Rosanna that have decided, I want to go and see what I can do and charter the planes. And what's really remarkable, too, is that it starts off with a smaller plane and then grows into what was the biggest plane I flew on the weekend I went down. I flew from Pittsburgh down to Fort Lauderdale. It was smaller than the plane that was chartered to evacuate those people. The plane back from Miami to Pittsburgh was smaller than that plane, and the need continues to grow even to this day.
I want to go back to the Al-Qaeda-ISIS comparison. Had Al-Qaeda or ISIS wreaked that kind of damage, what would the American public's reaction have been? And why do you think that we didn't have an Al-Qaeda kind of reaction to this?
I think it wasn't an Al-Qaeda reaction because it wasn't done by people. It wasn't done by a foreign government. It wasn't done by a hostile people.
But the result was the same.
It was the same.
Yeah.
It was the same. And could there have been more done? It could have been more done. I think one of the things about Puerto Rico is that it's not a state. That even though the citizens are American citizens, they don't have the same pull.
They don't have senators.
They don't have influence. They don't have voting members of Congress. As a result of that, people don't pay as much attention as they otherwise would. If Puerto Rico would have been a state that does vote, that does have the same level of pull that other states would then have, I believe the response would have been greater.
You agree with that?
Yes. So I was born and raised in Puerto Rico. I moved here 4 years ago to study at Carnegie Mellon. I was born a U.S. citizen with Social Security. I have a U.S. passport. I cannot vote for the President of the United States. It wasn't until I became a resident of Pittsburgh, of Pennsylvania, that I was able to do so. No one cares about our interests because we have no voting power. So why look after a whole demographic who isn't going to help you?
Let me, the 800-pound gorilla here, raise this question. Had this disaster been on, say, Nantucket Island, where wealthy white people lived, would the reaction have been different?
There's a part of me that says, yes, it would have been different.
I've never thought about race as a part of it. I never have. But there is something to say about a country where half of the population doesn't know Puerto Rico is a Commonwealth, and me, born and raised there as a U.S. citizen.
A lot of people learned about that, I think, for the first time as a result of this hurricane, about the status of people born in Puerto Rico. Most people have not chartered a plane, let alone most college students. How did you know what to do?
I connected with a friend of mine who's a medical student on the island. She had evacuated to Florida a few days after Hurricane Maria. Her mother works for an aviation company and was able to sneak her on a flight that had an empty seat. And from there, she started speaking with the doctors who used to run her program and get them what they needed from hospitals in Miami and sneak them on these planes. And so I said, I told her what I was trying to do, put me, send me to the best company to work with. And so she referred Monarch Air Group in Fort Lauderdale, who has been instrumental in making all these missions happen.
Okay, you've done 4 trips already. You're planning a 5th, and you say more might be necessary, probably will be necessary. You're fundraising. We're going to give the information on that and talk a little bit more about all of the people who have pitched in along with you to help. So many people volunteering from Pittsburgh. More of the KDPG Sunday edition in just a moment.